Okay, whenever you're ready.
Okay. Well, thank you everybody for joining us tonight. It's like a little family reunion to some degree. It's wonderful to have Eileen Guenther with us this evening. Thank you, Eileen, for accepting our uh, chapter's invitation to be with Eileen. Welcome back to Southeast Michigan. Eileen was here in October of 2016 when Megan and I invited her to come and play a recital at Cherry Hill. And then the next night, she led a workshop for us on her book, Rivals or Team, and Clergy Musician Relationships. Eileen played the inaugural concert for our Music at Cherry Hill concert series that continues to this day and has grown over the years. So we thank you for that, Eileen. For those who don't know, Eileen is professor of church music emerita at Wesley Theological Seminary in Washington, D.C. She holds bachelor's degrees from the University of Kansas and graduate degrees from the Catholic University of America in DC. As I said, she's a noted author, church musician, organ recitalist. In addition to her book, Rivals or Team, is her wonderful book, In Their Own Words, Slave Life and the Power of Spirituals. And as you'll see tonight, Eileen has a passion for the power of spirituals, and she has led over 100 presentations on her book, In Their Own Words, with choirs, soloists, and congregations from Atlanta, Georgia to Ashland, Oregon. We had hoped to have Eileen come back to our area and do a concert, a presentation live, but so we're grateful that she's able to be with us virtually this evening. So it's a pleasure and a privilege for me personally to welcome Eileen to be with us tonight, as I studied with her for about 4.5 years a while back. So Eileen, on behalf of the Ann Arbor chapter, we welcome you and we're glad you're with us tonight.
Eileen, I think you're muted.
Yes, Eileen,
You're still muted.
we can't hear you, Eileen. You're muted.
Okay.
There you are.
There we go.
I can't get my script to scroll. It has Joe, your computer trouble has transferred here.
I guess so.
Well,
Where's Zoom?
the Zoom is here. Whatever. Anyway. I'll just, if I can just use this, that'll be okay. You said you, okay. Mark, go ahead if you
Okay.
would.
This certain song they would sing as a chorus to words which to many would seem unmeaning jargon, but which nevertheless were full of meaning to themselves. I have sometimes thought that the mere hearing of those songs would do more to impress some minds with the horrible character of slavery than the reading of whole volumes of philosophy on the subject could do. A quote by Frederick Douglass.
Thank you, Mark, for the invitation to come out, and Joe for your technical assistance. We actually had a rehearsal yesterday, and it was fun to know that the music was going to sound as good as the recordings allow. This will be the first time I have actually done this approach. To show the versatility of spirituals, I've tried to find multiple performance approaches to this music, both historic and contemporary. And of course, we can do that because we're on Zoom, as opposed to working with choir or soloists, where you're slightly more limited. At any rate, I do want to say at the very beginning that I approach this music with great humility, and I'm profoundly honored to be asked to share my research with you. My role is not one of being Eileen, but of an African griot or storyteller to connect the various components that make up this grand tapestry. When we talk about spirituals, we also talk about religion and about slavery, and there's no way around it. And when I say talk, these are not largely my words. They're the words of those who were enslaved that come to us three different ways. First, of course, the spirituals themselves. Then two other types, selections from the 204 book-length narratives written by those enslaved, and that was in the sort of 18th to 19th century, and the 2,300 interviews conducted in the 1930s under the auspices of the Federal Writers Project. These poignant books and moving interviews combine to tell the story of slave life and the way the spirituals mirrored that life. These are eyewitness accounts, and they're unique for a couple of reasons. They come from a broad spectrum of those enslaved, those who worked in the house, those who worked in the field, cooperative individuals and rebellious individuals, urban and rural slaves and runaways. And two, as historian Henry Louis Gates reminds us, quoting, authentic slave narratives are of great significance since African-American slaves were among the only enslaved people in the world to produce a body of writing that testified to their experiences. You might be asking yourself, do spirituals matter still today? And I say yes, really yes. Depending on the situation, we're only 4 to 5 generations away from slavery. A student in my class, the last time I taught this, which was a year ago, had a great-grandfather who was one of those interviewed by the Federal Writers Project. But more than that, if in his I Have a Dream speech, Dr. King could call on African Americans to sing My Country 'Tis of Thee, and also call on whites to sing free at last, thank God Almighty, I'm free at last. There's something to be said for learning each other's history by singing each other's songs. Spirituals are not just history, of course. They're also music of resistance and music that, if we can let it, can help us deal with real life situations today. It's all about witness. The word witness comes up throughout the interviews and the narratives. Those enslaved witnessed baptismal ceremonies, weddings, and funerals. They witnessed the sale of a child from a mother. They witnessed so-called Christians administering communion to the slaves, only to punish them unmercifully when church was over. They witnessed the kindness one slave showed another, sneaking them food or adding to the bag of cotton when they hadn't picked quite enough. Just as the music gives us witness to the power of hope, these first-person narratives make us witnesses to the life of those enslaved from the inside out. This is why it matters to know the context when you sing the music. These spirituals are a witness to a community of women and men with a profound consciousness and self-understanding, and they stand as an historical record of the reality of their oppression, unparalleled in the history of human civilization. These songs are themselves a witness. We'll hear Indra Thomas singing Who Will Be a Witness, arranged by Hall Johnson.
Him or bless, all things are done by his will. He spoke to the sea and the sea stood still. Now ain't that a witness for my Lord? Ain't that a witness for my Lord? Ain't that a witness for my Lord? My soul is a witness for my Lord. Now there was a man of the Pharisees. His name was Nicodemus, and he didn't believe. The same came to Christ by night, wanted to be taught out of human sight. Nicodemus was a man desired to know how a man could be born when he is old. Christ told Nicodemus as a friend, man, you must be born again. He said, marvel not, man, if you want to be wise. Repent, believe, and be baptized. Then you'll be a witness for my Lord. You'll be a witness for my Lord. You'll be a witness for my Lord. Saul is a witness for my Lord. You read about Samson from his birth, strongest man that ever his strength was never found out. Till his wife sat upon his knee. She said, tell me where your strength lies, if you please. Now Samson's wife, she talked so fair. Samson said, cut off for my hair. Shave my head just as clean as your hand, and my strength will come like a natural man. Now Samson was a witness for my Lord. Samson was a witness for my Lord. Samson was a witness for my Lord. Saul is a witness for my Lord. There's another witness. There's another witness. There's another witness. My soul is a witness for my Lord. My soul is a witness for my
Let each reader put himself in the slave's place to whatever extent he can. If you are like most of your colleagues in slavery, you are not only distressed by, but indignant over your slavery. You are driven against your will to work from dark to dark. You are forced to work without adequate clothes. Your food and lodging are subliminal. You hear clothing and shoes referred to in derogatory terms because of their sleaziness. Your stated name is rarely used. You see your closest relatives and friends sold in an instant and forever. You are held to strictest account, but no promise ever made to you is binding, legally or otherwise. Lovell, Black Song, The Forge, and the Flame.
It won't surprise you that many experiences of slave life are captured in the spirituals. The heartbreak of families separated by sale, the picture of life in general are embedded in detail in the next song we're going to hear, No More Auction Block for Me. Their rations, a peck of corn and a pint of salt, those are not metaphors. They were real. That was the limit, and if they ran out, they would either be naked or hungry. If the melody to this sounds familiar, it was incorporated into We Shall Overcome, probably the most widely sung protest song ever, and we hear the inimitable Paul Robeson singing.
No more auction block for me. No more, no more. No more auction block for me. Many thousand gone. No more pint of salt for me. No more, no more. No more pint of salt for me. Many thousand gone. No more driver's lash for me. No more, no more. No more driver's lash for me. Though many thousand gone.
Let's step back a second and talk about the origins. Anthropologically, we all share a common humanity and a common origin in Africa, and we're all made in the image of God. This connection means each of us has a vested interest in the well-being or the suffering of every other person. And I don't think this has ever been more important than it is today. You probably know Africans started arriving involuntarily on the shores of the Americas in 1501. They were first brought to North America in 1619, Jamestown, Virginia, as a matter of fact, just over 400 years ago. There are no hard figures for the number of Africans taken from their homes and forced to labor in foreign lands between the 16th and mid-19th century. Estimates run between 10 and 11 million on one end and as high as 20 on the other. These Africans were transported in the bellies of ships, a voyage called the Maafa, Middle Passage, or the Triangular Slave Trade. The voyages numbered between 20,000 and 35,000. Some estimate as high as 60,000. Sorry, I lost. The captives brought little with them on the Middle Passage except their faith, their desire to survive, and the melodies and rhythms of their homelands. When we talk about where did spirituals come from, well, they began in Africa, specifically West Africa, where a great number of Africans thrust into slavery had called home. West Africa boasts a rich musical culture and a strong oral tradition of storytelling, with personal and tribal history all codified in song. Some notes on the music. The first printed tradition, oral tradition, I'm sorry, my cursor is totally misbehaving. Bad cursor. The first printed collection of spirituals, slave songs of the United States, dates from 1867, just over 150 years ago. Spirituals were not composed in the customary sense of the term, but created. Somebody starts to sing, somebody else adds the next line, and then on until you have a whole song. Probably originated by an individual, but owned by the community. The spirituals that got sung were the ones that they wanted to sing, that met the community's needs, and we wouldn't be singing songs today that hadn't. They would never have gotten notated in 1867 or in any of the other editions that succeeded that one. There's not much agreement as to whether there was singing in parts or if it was just unison. We've got people who say we always sang in parts, and somebody said we never sang in parts. So we don't really know. We also don't know how many there were composed. Some say hundreds, others say thousands, but the most educated guesses are probably around 800 spirituals. Regardless of the exact number, they are considered America's richest body of folk music. The melodies and the rhythms we sing today may not be what's printed on the page, and they may not be what you've heard before. And for those of us who consider ourselves classically trained, it makes us a little twitchy to think that there is no correct version. This is oral tradition. People began writing the songs down. Every time somebody sang it again, something changed. They went to a different geographical area, had the same song, but it was still different. So the fact is, there's nothing right or wrong about the music. It is just different. There are numerous harrowing stories of punishment in the era of slavery, noted in graphic detail, particularly in the narratives, but sometimes in the interviews as well. The ways masters found to exert control over their property were often sadistic. But the worst, most feared punishment of all was being sold away from your family or having your family members sold away from you. The following narrative took place a few miles from where Greg and I live in the Washington, D.C. area, just outside the Beltway on Old Georgetown Road. It comes from an autobiography that was incorporated into the groundbreaking and influential novel that really put a face on slavery, Uncle Tom's Cabin.
In consequence of my master's decease, it became necessary to sell the estate and the slaves in order to divide the property among the heirs. My brothers and sisters were bid off one by one, while my mother, holding my hand, looked on in agony of grief. She was bought by a man named Isaac R., residing in Montgomery County, Maryland. And then I was offered to the assembled purchasers. My mother, half distracted with the parting forever from all her children, pushed through the crowd while the bidding for me was going on to the spot where R was standing. She fell at his feet and clung to his knees, entreating him in tones that only a mother could command, to buy her baby as well as herself, and spare to her one of her little ones at least. Can it be believed that this man thus appealed to was capable not merely of turning a deaf ear to her supplication, but of disengaging himself from her with such violent blows and kicks as to reduce her to the necessity of creeping out of his reach and mingling the groan of bodily suffering with the sob of a breaking heart. I was bought by a stranger at 5 or 6 years of age. Josiah Henson, Maryland.
We'll hear a treatment that is very individual, one by John Legend, who does some riffing on this time-honored song of lament.
Sometimes I feel like a motherless child. Sometimes I feel like a motherless child. And sometimes I feel like a motherless child alone, a long way from home. Whoa. Now sometimes I feel like I'm almost gone. Sometimes I feel like I'm almost gone. And sometimes I feel, yeah, like I'm all alone, alone. Cry, I feel restless and I don't know why. I cry for help but still feel alone, like a motherless child a long way from home. Lord, I'm lost, I can't find my way. I'm dealing with the struggles in my day-to-day. My soul is weak and I want to be strong. I try to run away but I've been running too long. Yeah, yeah, I've been running too long. shoulder when I need to cry. I feel restless and I don't know why. I cry for help but still feel alone, like a motherless child a long way from home. Lord, I'm lost, I can't find my way. I'm dealing with the struggles in my day-to-day. My soul is weak and I want to be strong. Try to run away, but I've been running too long. Yeah, I've been running too long. Yeah, I've been running. I've been running too long. Like a motherless child. Like a motherless child. Like a motherless child, yeah. Like a motherless child, so lost and so alone. Like a motherless child, oh, yeah. Like a motherless child, yeah, yeah, yeah. Like a motherless child. All right, y'all. Now, this is my last free show for a while, so I hope y'all enjoyed it.
We can cut this. Thanks, Joe. I find that very compelling, actually. Most of the spirituals were composed after 1800, the era of the Second Great Awakening, when missionaries began to bring Christianity to the slaves. While all African peoples enslaved were not Christian by any means, religion was very important to many of them, and often, by their own confession, critical to their survival. The enslaved population might attend worship with their owners, or they might worship in a sanctioned service on the plantation. But the worship that mattered most were the services held in secret in the bush, far away from the eyes and ears of the owners and overseers. This was the worship that spoke to their souls. As one formerly enslaved woman said, "That old white preaching wasn't nothing. Old white preacher used to talk with their tongues without saying nothing. But Jesus told us slaves to talk with our hearts." Nancy Williams, Virginia. Jesus was a key factor in the life of those Christian slaves. They sang about Jesus's birth, "Go Tell It on the Mountain," about his ministry, "My God is a rock in the weary land," about his death, "Were you there?" About his resurrection, "He rose," about his triumphal entry, "Right on, King Jesus." The late theologian James H. Cone explained that the essence of antebellum Black religion was the emphasis on the somebodyness. That word is important, the somebodyness of Black slaves. The content of the Black preacher's message stressed the essential worth of their person. He also says the spirituals affirm a complete trust in God to make right in the next world what was done wrong in this world. Since they had no economic or political security in this world, they put their trust in Jesus, whom they believed would make everything all right.
In answer to the question of how did you bear it all? How did you live? The response was, "I couldn't have done it, dear, without Master Jesus. He's held me up. I'd have died long ago without him." A former Alabama slave.
This is "Give Me Jesus," sung by Callista Day, who has sung with the American Spiritual Ensemble.
To
Wow. She actually is really, really famous for singing that one song, and I hope you appreciate it as I do. Spirituals are personal and they're communal. They reach out to encompass the needs of the community, and they also address the heartfelt needs of the individual. It's me, it's me, it's me, oh Lord, standing in the need of prayer. Lord, I want to be a Christian. I and we are basically synonymous. Spirituals cover many emotional bases. That's one of the reasons they connect so well to people's hearts, regardless of time or place. The scholar and historian W.B. Du Bois called spirituals songs of sadness, and of course that's true. But they're also songs of liberation, triumph, comfort, and hope. The music gave hope in a situation that seemed hopeless and encouraged faith in a situation where there would have seemed to be no reason for faith. A good number of the spirituals are code songs, songs that seem to mean one thing on the surface and something entirely different to those in the know. The unlocking of the code of some of the songs is fairly obvious. Egypt, Babylon, or hell reference the land of the enslaved people, or more specifically, being sold south. Obtaining freedom was crossing over the Jordan River, which might actually be a reference to the Ohio. The Promised Land might refer to Africa, to the north, to Canaan, to heaven, or after the 1850 Fugitive Slave Act, it had to refer to Canada. Much of the time, secrecy was essential for the slave's survival. It was illegal to teach slaves to read or write in many states, so their communication was through song. Any song that referenced shoes, wings, wheels, or a mode of transportation, for instance, ride the chariot, can think of many others, meant that escape might well be in the works. The slaves could sing what they dared not say. Quoting, "One song I know I used to sing to the slaves when master went away, but I wouldn't be so fool as to let him hear me." While we don't know for sure what every verse of our next song means, I do love Wade in the Water because of the different layers of meaning, I think more than maybe any other of the spirituals. Baptism was probably the most important ritual in the life of the slave, and this was a song that was sung on that occasion. Water was the boundary between enslavement and freedom. We just mentioned the Ohio River. Harriet Tubman is reported to have used this song as a signal for escapees. They often walked along a waterway because that's how they could figure out where they were. Otherwise, the woods, there were no signs. They couldn't read anyway, but they could follow a waterway and get to someplace different from where they'd started. Dogs were ever in pursuit of the escaping slaves. So if they moved to the water, the dogs couldn't as easily pick up their scent. And finally, God's going to trouble the water. Ultimately, freedom will come, if not to them, to their children or their grandchildren.
Wade in the water, wade in the water, children, wade in the water, God's gonna trouble the water. Come on and wade in the water, you gotta wade. All dressed up in white, God's gonna trouble the water. You know they must be the children of the Israelites. God's gonna trouble the water. Well, now you wanna wade in the water. The water. See those children dressed in black. God's gonna trouble the water. Well, you know, they come a long way, ain't turning back. God's gonna trouble the water.
Children, they're dressed up in blue. You know my God's gonna trouble the water. I see it looks like my people, they're coming on through. Well, my God's gonna trouble the water.
Well, everybody knows it's wade in the water. Children, trouble the water. See those children dressed in red. My God, He's gonna trouble the water. You know it must be the children that Moses led. My God, He's gonna trouble the water. All dressed in green, God's gonna trouble the water. You know they're moving down to that Jordan stream. Well, God's gonna trouble the water. Come on, children, down in the water, my children, wade on in the water, my
in the water.
gonna trouble the water. Everybody ought to just wait on me.
Wait in the water,
Wait in the water.
wait in the water, children, wait in the water,
Wait in the water, children. Wait
in the water, my children, wait in the water. You know my God's gonna trouble the water. Wait, my God's gonna trouble the water. I know my God's gonna trouble the water. My God's gonna trouble. Well, my God's gonna trouble the water.
God is gonna trouble the water.
There's nothing like Sweet Honey in the Rock. Other songs of the Underground Railroad are also compelling, like Swing Low, Sweet Chariot, or Steal Away, which, by the way, is the only spiritual that's been associated with a particular person who might have composed it, which is Nat Turner. His 1831 Insurrection might have, Steal Away might have been sung for that. And there's also more than one possible meaning: that a conductor was arriving ready to lead slaves out of slavery on the Underground Railroad, or that a meeting would be held that night to worship or maybe to plan an insurrection.
After my conversion, I would often steal away to Jesus with other slaves to some quiet place for prayer, over the stable or in the kitchen when the master and mistress were away, though we knew that if we were discovered, we should be locked up for the night, and that the next morning we should receive from 5 to 9 or even 30 lashes for unlawfully assembling together. Over 5 slaves in such a gathering, though they had passes, constituted an unlawful assembly. At night, no slave was allowed to be without a pass from his master. We used to have such a good time at these meetings. How appropriate to sing softly and quietly, steal away, steal away. I ain't got long to stay here. Thomas Johnson, Virginia.
And we'll stop that there. That was Chanticleer, of course. It was always about freedom, and freedom had more than one interpretation. It could mean freedom from slavery in this life, which was, as we've talked about, across the Ohio River or the Mason-Dixon line, or to Canada, or liberation from this life, which would be heaven. Songs about heaven, the second coming, life eternal, those are the same songs that all reflect a longing for one kind of liberation or another. Not surprisingly, there are more spirituals written about freedom than any other subject.
If I had my life to live over again, I would die fighting rather than be a slave. I want no man's yoke on my shoulders no more. Robert Falls, North Carolina.
And this is O Freedom, sung by the Spirituals Project at the University of Denver, conducted by Roger Holland.
I shall take my voice wherever there are those who want to hear the melody of freedom or the words that might inspire hope and courage in the face of despair and fear. My weapons are peaceful, for it is only by peace that peace can be attained. The song of freedom must prevail. Paul Robeson.
Hope for freedom, that's what has enabled those who were enslaved to keep on keeping on. Freedom for themselves, for their children and their grandchildren. Freedom like a torch in the night would shine for all to see. No song better encapsulates that thought than This Little Light of Mine, sung by the American Spiritual Ensemble.
I expect nothing, but there may be an attempt made to carry me back to slavery. But I give fair warning to all concerned that now, knowing the value of liberty, I prize it far above life, and no year of suns will ever shine upon my chains as a slave. I can die, but I cannot be made a slave again. Milton Clark, Kentucky.
This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine. Let it shine. Let it shine. Everywhere I go, I'm gonna let it shine. Everywhere I go, I'm gonna let it shine. Everywhere I go, I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine. Let it shine. Let it all through the night, I'm gonna let it shine, shine. All through the night, I'm gonna let it shine. All through this, I'm gonna let it shine. All through this room, I'm gonna let it shine. And with letting our light shine, my prepared notes are finished. And I thank you for your attendance and your attention. And Mark, were we going to offer the opportunity for questions?
Sure, yes. Anybody have any questions they wish to ask?
I wanted to ask a question about that first publication. It was 1867.
Yes.
Is there more information, like where or who published or?
Oh,
who put it
absolutely.
together?
And in fact, here is,
Okay,
and it's, it's republished by Dover. So it's
yeah, okay,
very
okay.
Slave Songs of the United States, the classic 1867 anthology.
But
And there were others that followed fairly closely. The Fistulary Singers did a collection, I think 1872, 73, and other people did others. But this was the first one. It was educators who went to the Sea Islands to educate those who had been enslaved, and kind of a subtext to prove that they were educable.
okay.
And then as they heard the music, they were completely entranced, as I have been since I heard this music. And they wanted to write it down and be able to share it. And thank goodness they did, because oral tradition only works if you're passing from person to person. And if you break that person to person link, then you have to have something that's in writing. So there were a couple of musicians that were involved, and the 4 folks that were part of the project. And some of them were more the people, and some were the musicians. And that's what got us the very first collection of notated spirituals.
I would think, I don't know, but I would think it may have been something they had to be fairly brave to publish. I don't know.
It was published in the North.
Okay,
So, they were actually from the Philadelphia area. So I'm not sure about the bravery part, except that they were brave for taking it on because they never felt they got it right.
oh,
People sang, from the African tradition in microtones, not the same 12 half steps that we, that's part of our diatonic scale. So that was hard for them to do that. And I haven't even mentioned the dialect aspect. I mean, there's so much to talk about, and I had agreed with Mark, we'd stay around an hour. But folks were coming from Africa, all kinds of different dialects mixed in with English. And, and once they took, so it was really a hard thing for people to figure out, what are they saying? And this is still an issue today. Do you honor the dialect that has been notated, or do you anglicize it? And in what conditions do you do that? And I've done a couple of things and wrote an article for the hymn on exactly that subject, because it's very tricky and people want to do it right. And people who are white don't want to dishonor the tradition or those who were enslaved, but they feel insecure about it. And so to that extent of bravery, these folks did too.
okay, thank you.
Thanks for asking.
Any other questions?
I could add that I worked on the book about 10 years and I read on it about another 10 years before that. It's a large book, and I kind of thought that the publisher would say, as I was sending chapters, ooh, you can stop anytime now. It's getting to be a little big and heavy. And he never did. So, it's 520 pages. That took a very long time, and there's probably another half a book in my computer, because the editor I was working with, she was the one that kept fussing. It's getting long enough, Eileen. You don't really need to have that narrative and this one. So which one is the best? So with any luck, I made the right selections of which one was the best. But it's totally a labor of love, and feels a bit like mission work of wanting to convey the wisdom and the beauty of this music to people today. I think it matters today. And I think it matters that we sing these songs today, not just leave them in, on a shelf, or only have, say, choirs do fancy arrangements. Congregations can do very much less complicated arrangements. And the beauty of the music and the power of the text, I think it really is a from the heart to the heart kind of thing.
Eileen, I was just curious, how did you, what kind of led you down this path in the first place?
Oh, that's such a good question. So thank you for asking. I could probably say it, but I don't always assume people care about that. But I had, and I have to say had, a very close friend that I taught with at the seminary, William B. McLean, who was part of the civil rights movement. He worked with Dr. King. He is a powerful preacher. I have to say, was a powerful preacher. He died about a month ago, very suddenly. But we were friends and had worked together on services, and he knew of my passion for the music. And he says, "Oh, you've got a whole lot of CDs and DVDs. Why don't you come into my class?" And so I did the CDs and DVD type of stuff. And then he'll say, "I've got to be gone. Um, so maybe could you prepare this lecture?" So I started doing that. So the notes from my lectures from his class were the basis for this. And then I started teaching it on my own, and he retired and I continued on my own. And then just started sharing in not webinars initially, of course, but with choirs and with soloists. Sometimes a bunch of choirs will get together or a bunch of soloists. And the whole point for me is not my words, but the words of those who were enslaved. And I think that we as musicians have an obligation to go to the context. Performance practice, this matters. We do that in all of our Bach and Brahms. And I think the spirituals, although an oral tradition, I think they are deserving of it. So part of this is a bit of a soapbox for me, saying, look at where these songs came from. Don't say these are fun spirituals. There may be something that has a slight tongue-in-cheek aspect, like Scandalize My Name or This Train. But basically, these are out of terrible conditions. And they are songs of hope, as well as songs of sorrow. And one of the things that not everybody knows, but Frederick Douglass talked about, is that people didn't sing out of the emotion they were feeling at the moment. They sang with a goal of feeling something different than what they were in. So when people from the North went to the South and they heard the slaves singing, they said, "Oh, how bad can this slavery stuff be? Listen to them. They sound happy." Well, they sounded happy because they wanted to take themselves out of the desperately difficult situation where they were emotionally to another place, and music is what did it. So maybe a longer answer than you were looking for, Megan, but thanks for asking.
No, thank you, Eileen.
Any other questions? Anybody else?
Let me ask a question, Mark.
Sure.
I don't want to put anybody on the spot, but do many of you do spirituals either with choir or with congregation, with whatever groups you work with? You can just sort of nod or, nah. Yeah, I see some nods.
Elton.
It's
Well, we only do the ones that are in the hymnal.
I mean, that's fine. And certain hymnals have a huge collection. In fact, my colleague who invited me on this journey was basically responsible for the hymns, the spirituals in the United Methodist hymnal, which was one of the first hymnals to include a large body of spirituals. He also edited Songs of Zion, which was the first collection in a very long time of spirituals and gospel music. And the publisher saying, "Oh, that it'll never sell." Well, they blinked and it had sold 2.5 million copies by the time they unblinked. And it's been in many print editions. So people do sing them. And I think there's a bit of an urban myth about nobody sings spirituals anymore, especially Black churches. And I had my students, the last time I taught, offered them a project, which several of them did, about finding out, contacting churches and saying, "Are you singing spirituals or not?" They were. It may be a gospel version, but spirituals are eminently, they just so many different styles that they lend themselves to, that you don't have to sing the original sort of unaccompanied, slightly raw version. There's many things. I mean, the Singers, when they went on tour in 1872, the first thing they did was start arranging them. So arrangements are not something new, and they're not something 2021. They've been arranged, and spirituals started being sung for an audience, not necessarily for the community. They may have arranged their own, we don't really ever know. But when Fisk went to the North to raise money for the university, they figured out that they were going to be a little more in demand if they did some arranging. So Ella Shepherd, one of the original Fisk Jubilee singers, was a pianist, a piano teacher, and she did some very interesting arrangements that are still sung today. So no guilt by singing an arrangement. Do we have time for our encore? Is Joe? I'm not seeing Joe here, but I'm sure.
I stepped away for a second, but I am back.
Yeah. Shall we end with "Every Time I Feel the Spirit"?
Yes, and would you like me to display your bibliography as well?
Oh, sure. And I'm going to mention that this is a vintage recording. Tuskegee Singers. It's Dawson's arrangement, and he is conducting. And the last time I looked, this CD was like, I don't know, $240 or something. So I really protect my my copy carefully.
Well, with that, we'll end with that. So here's the bibliography. I will come right back to that.
Every time I feel the Spirit moving in my heart, I will pray. Yes, every time I feel the Spirit moving in my heart, I will pray.
On the mountain, my thoughts flow, out of His mountain, fire and smoke. Look all around me, it looks so fine, to ask my Lord.
Every time I feel the Spirit moving in my heart, I will pray. Yes, every time I feel the Spirit moving in my heart, I will pray.
Jordan's river is chill and cold, it chills the body but not the soul. There ain't but one train upon this track, it runs to heaven and my land. Every time I feel the Spirit, I feel the heart, I will pray. Yes, every time I feel the Spirit, I will pray.
Every time I feel the Spirit, I will pray. Yes, I will pray. Every time I feel the Spirit moving in my heart, I'll pray. Yes, every time I feel the Spirit moving in my heart, I will pray. Yes, I will pray.
There we go. I would say thank you, Joe, so much. You have just been a fabulous engineer. And thank you, Mark, for the invitation.
And thank you for joining us.
Yes, thank you, Eileen. Thank you for spending some time with us tonight. LJ?
After hearing "Every Time," it reminded me of when I was in college, and I went on 3 European choir tours. And the director always included 3 or 4 spirituals in each concert. And that was one of them we sang, but the spirituals always got the most applause. Always.
Melodies, rhythm,
Yep.
the text. I mean, if you strip away where you are now to where they were then,
Yep.
and think about the text, I mean, it's so powerfully moving. And that was actually one of the things in my church and at the seminary. I found that spirituals connected with people more than any other music.
We, at the dedication or the celebration of my church becoming a basilica, we did the "Every Time I Feel the Spirit," and that was the one that people seem to connect with the most. And it was sung by Audivi, which was helpful. But
So, well, again, thank you, Eileen, for your time this evening, and thank you to all those who joined us. And
Yeah.
Good to see friends and make new ones.
yes,
Yep.
Say
Thank
it.
you.
someday in person.
I
Yeah.
hope so. Yes. Well,
You know-
thank you, everyone, and
Thank
have
you.
a good evening.
All
Thank
right.
you, Eileen.
Good evening, everyone.
With you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.